All right, hi everybody. John Meadows here with the one and only Dave Tate and Josh Wade. So today we just finished training legs, and we wanted to talk about how you should train when you're dieting hard. So Josh is 3 weeks out from the New York Pro, and as you guys know, I trained here many weekends over the years, preparing myself with Dave keeping an eye on me to make sure I didn't kill myself. So there are some things that you need to look for when you're dieting hard, specifically when you get toward the end of a pre-contest phase. Now, I want to just talk a little bit about some things that I've done with Josh, and Dave's going to talk about kind of what he used to look at when I was getting ready to compete. And I think there's some really good information you'll be able to take from this and apply to your own training or to your client's training. So one of the things that I noticed with Josh recently, let me back up for a second. So what I've always preached is that your training should stay very intense. You don't just all of a sudden lighten the weight and start doing a lot of reps with the magical theory of higher reps all of a sudden get you really lean. Don't buy into that, okay? So one of the things I've always preached is this time around your training that you should fuel yourself, you should eat, you should train hard, and because you really need to, at a minimum, try to protect your muscle, try to gain muscle, but it's going to be really hard, if not impossible, in a caloric deficit. But you should at least try to protect your muscles. So you want to keep your intensity up. So the question becomes, if you've seen some of our old videos, we're doing, crazy drop sets, supersets, all kinds of really demanding type combinations. So the question becomes, how do you train them when you get really close to a show? So I'm going to give you some examples of what we've seen with Josh to kick off this video. So one of the things I saw with Josh, and I actually noticed this myself, was as we got closer to the show, sometimes the high intensity techniques that I really love, all of the drop sets and iso holds and partials, you can't do as much of that stuff. And what I noticed with Josh was his legs would be a little flatter. I also noticed that with myself just through the years thinking about it. So we pull back a little bit on the intensity. Notice I didn't say we lighten the weight. I did not say that. I said we pull back a little bit on the intensity. You got to realize a couple things. Nutritionally, you're in a different state, probably not eating as many carbs and any of that kind of stuff. But when you do that, now you want to add a little bit of frequency. So one of the things I did with Josh was his leg training is more frequent. So if he was training his legs, say maybe once every 6 days or 5 days, now it's maybe once every 3 or 4 days. So you're stimulating them more often. You're just not beating them into the ground. And I think that's made a pretty big difference in your training.
Yeah, I agree. I've definitely noticed an increase of fullness back. And like John said, everything's kind of been hard and heavy. I mean, I'm sticking to the 8 to 12 rep range, but still pushing really pretty heavy weight. And being able to have enough fuel to have that intensity to push that heavy weight, knowing that 8 to 12 reps or 8 to 10 reps, I'm going to have a rest and I'm going to be able to do it again. Not that I'm going to get completely taxed from all the drop sets. So mentally, I'm able to actually push harder because I know that it's just going to be a hard set and then a rest. And it's made a world of difference. I mean, I'm getting the fullness back in my legs, which has been amazing. The separation and detail is tremendous, even more so now with the muscle pushing against the skin. So it's working well for me.
Now, so even though it's been many years since you competed, I do remember the preparation of getting you lean for the last-minute muscle and fitness shoots. So yeah. Dave is actually, he actually competed. Don't let him lie to you. He has done a bodybuilding contest or two, if I remember right. But so Dave had the experience of kind of watching me through the years. I really tried to push conditions. So Dave can give you some insight of what he looked for with me too. I mean, there were times when I was so depleted I couldn't even think. I would just walk in the door and just say, Dave, what do I do today?
I think there were 5 shows, maybe 6, because it was before you turned pro. So it was the 3 last shows before you turned pro. So I think 2 North Americans and a USA maybe.
Masters National.
Something was in there. So when John first started coming out, he was in off-season mode, so I kind of knew where he was as far as muscle fullness and stuff like that. And it was weird because my experience with bodybuilders is they were never as lean as what he was in the off season. But that gave me kind of a basic guideline because I don't really know about bodybuilding. And the other thing is he was out every weekend. So I didn't see him every day. So it's not like his normal training partner who we'd have in Columbus that sees him every single day. So it's hard to see changes, or disruptions when you see somebody every single day. I could see him from one week to the next week and know immediately that his back was flat, and that's where it was most notable, was in not really the lat thickness, not so much the width, but the thickness. And then his lower back was also a huge tell. I mean, even in the off season, how much fat he would put on. That's where he holds his fat, is really in the lower back. So I would even check that, being a compulsive person I am, is in the off season. It's like, man, this is getting a little bit too thick, where everybody else would say he's lean, and I'm like, no, I'm telling you, he's not, because I know where this is.
It's just in one place.
Yeah, this lower back right now is 10 weeks out, and everybody else is like, oh, you're 4 weeks out. I'm like, I'm telling you, it doesn't work like that, because when it gets closer, it slows down. He gets leaner, but it's just really, really slow. Then it became a process of John, as he was talking about here, of controlling the glycogen and trying to figure out, is this just because there's a glycogen loss, or has he actually lost muscle because of the dieting? And a few of these shows he was dropping body weight, so he was going down a weight class. So that became even more relevant. Like, oh, is this, spinal erector thickness flat, or is it actually gone? So at some point we had to switch from training legs and moving it to back, mainly because his back was getting trashed, but it helped me even more so because his back was one of the areas that he had to bring up, and that's where I was seeing some crazy things happening with the erectors and with the lower traps, just the thickness part. And that, from a training standpoint then, as he was going along, taking the legs out of the equation, because the legs were just, you weren't worried, your weight wasn't as much of an issue. I don't think glycogen was much of an issue. I think the dieting for the shows was a little bit easier for you from that standpoint. But during the lighter, the 212s, it would turn into zombie land.
Yeah,
and just,
that's when it got really tough.
Yes, being very observant on how he walked through the door, the nonverbals. He always can't remember where he put, but when he was in zombie mode, he literally had no idea where the hell his belt was, and it would be right in front of him. So knowing that that's normal, but if he actually thinks that he left it at home, that's not normal. So then adjustments have to be made. And a lot of that was because it was very, very high volume back work. I think the highest volume back work he ever did, 60 some sets sometimes. That was a matter of making sure that all the seated stuff happened first. So if it was actually, it would be, your Meadows row, whatever that stuff was. But then once we got through the first two movements, if it was any type of seated row, seated low row, anything, seated pull downs, that happened on the front end of the training, because if it happened towards the ass end of the training, I swear to God, he would have fell asleep.
Yeah.
And he would have been done. He would have mentally checked out. So if I noticed that he was getting ready to mentally check out, then I would move to and suggest an exercise like a standing cable pullover, just to be able to get his arms up over the head, to raise his rib cage, to get breathing, to get oxygen, not because he was going to pass out, but just to kind of wake him up a little bit, because there was still another 20 sets to go. And I wasn't going to let him not do the other 20 sets. It's like, we're going to get through the other 20 sets, but they have to be productive sets. I could have run him into the ground easy, and left him on the floor, but what does that do? So that was kind of how I gauged it, is based upon the nonverbals. His eyes were a terrible tell, because they were just kind of dead all the time when he was dieting. So normally you can tell some people they're bloodshot, they're more watery than others. It was a terrible tell. The lower back was always a dead giveaway. He's always positive, he's always polite. So when that becomes quiet, and irritated, and to the point of just zombie land, which happened, I believe, twice, that was rough, because there were some times I really didn't know what to do, and I didn't know how to tell him, I didn't know what to do, because he's going to fight, he's going to want to take the hardest path, where I was trying to find a middle ground, in there, and kind of go that way. So I guess the takeaway I would have is know the training partner, know their nonverbal communication extremely well in the off season compared to preseason, and know what's more than 2 standard deviations away from that. Because if he came in and it was like 1 more deviation away from it, I would have had to tell him, you gotta get some carbs, man. You need to, drink your intra like all right now, and then just sit here for a half hour and see how you feel. But we never got to that point, even with the heat and all the other stuff. And he did his end. I'm not going to say I trained him by any means. I mean, I didn't have to worry about hydration or him getting the fluids in or any of the other stuff that most people probably have to worry about. And I don't think you need to worry about that with him as well. But that can't be what do I want to say, underlooked. Yeah. I mean, we're making the assumption here that everybody's staying hydrated, that they, if they're using an intra product, they're using and actually drinking the intra product, not just drinking a quarter of it and leaving 3/4 to the end.
Well, and people don't realize they go on a low carb diet, which they don't hold as much water. So then they're actually a little dehydrated just from that. And if you don't compensate for that with adding some salt to your meals, that was one of the biggest keys for me was, okay, we're going to lower carbs, and now we got to add some salt to our meals and some fluid. Because, there's a lot of people you talk to that when they lower their carbs, they start getting cramps. They start getting mineral imbalances. They start getting dehydrated. And that is a good thing to do if you want to tear a muscle or start shrinking fast. So that was one of the things we used to be really cognizant of too, is trying to get the fluid in. And, it's interesting with all the things that we're talking about, because I think in today's world, everybody tries to make it like a scientific equation. Like it's very numbers oriented, but there's an art to this. And anybody who's done this for many years can tell you there's an art to this. Okay, there's observing someone and knowing where they're at, knowing when to push harder, knowing when to pull back. And there is a magical combination that's different for everybody on how hard you can push somebody. There's being disciplined and working through a little being uncomfortable. That's part of it. But there's also a cliff. And that's what Dave tried to avoid with me, because our standard training intensity was drop sets, partials, until you couldn't move. And that was tremendously productive. I gained a lot of muscle training that way. But now when you're in a caloric deficit, you're in a different situation. So trying to keep the weights up was important, but also having that fine line of, okay, now you can't do a drop set on every single exercise. Now we can't, so there's...
We just did more sets, though. I mean, it just
did more sets, but not beating yourself into the ground. Yeah. So, and that's kind of an art. And it's nice. It was really nice for me to have somebody watching me, because as Dave said, you can't think. There'd be times I would get here and I literally had no idea how I got here. Like I would drive here, and this was about a 40-minute drive, and I'd get here and I'd go, man, how'd I get here? I didn't even remember getting here. Legitimate, I kid you not. There were times we would train legs, and before I could even get in the car and go home, I'd sit in one of these chairs and I'd fall asleep. I'd pass out. I'm sure you can relate to that.
That's where I'm about at right now.
The other thing I did too, though, now that I'm thinking back, is I had him pose after every training session. I didn't care about, the front poses at all as the back poses, and I would take pictures of it, because I figured that would be the flattest. He was going to keep in mind this is the last few weeks. So it's not like he's going to train his back and get this big major pump. He's going to think he has a major pump, but he really doesn't, because he just burnt glycogen all to hell. And I would have that, and then I would look at that picture when he came in, and then kind of use that as a reference when he was changing his shirt, to be able to say, okay, is this where it was? Because if it was worse than that, because that should be really the worst for the week if you take the pump aspect away, pull the veins away, pull that stuff away. And if it was down lower, then I knew for sure, or if his arms were ever, flat, it was bad.
Well, here's the other thing you guys can take away from this. A lot of people never even get to this. They don't even push themselves to this level. Like we're talking about zombie state. We're talking about
flat and full.
Fall asleep in your chair.
Just exhausted. And a lot of people can't even get to that, so this conversation doesn't even apply to them. But for those of you who want to know what it's like, you know, to get to that level where you're just every ounce of energy just to get up and walk to the bathroom, it seems like it's tough. And then sometimes you get a little flat, but it's glycogen. And as Dave said, but what if you're losing muscle? So if you're eating and you're still smaller, then it's okay, we got a problem. So there's so many little nuances here. It's great to have, here's one thing that I can't understate, that it's great to have an honest set of eyes looking at you. And there were always a couple people through the years that I was able to have that, and later in my career was Dave. You have to have someone that not only knows you well, but somebody that can just be honest with you. And I think one of the problems with competitors today is they got all their friends telling them how great they look, which they probably do think they look great. They're not lying to them, but you need someone who can be honest and say you're not where you need to be. So what happens is these people are surrounded by people saying you look great, you're going to win, you're going to win. They get to the show, they don't win, and they're, well, I thought I was going to win. Everybody told me I was going to win because they didn't have that honest set of eyes telling them, you know, if they told me I was ready to go and I was in shape, then there was no doubt in my mind I was ready. No doubt. On the other hand, if a lot of other people were looking at pictures and saying you're ready, like, I need to take that with a grain of salt.
You can't go off pictures though. I mean, because I would see it, take the picture of it, and then the picture is not what I see. You know, it's lighting, and so it plays such a big role. The other thing I think you should touch on is there's a difference between being pumped and not pumped, and being flat and being full. I think sometimes people don't even diet down if they're trying to diet for whatever reason to a point that they're even flat, to know what the difference between flat and full is. And so they think that they're flat just because they feel small. Mm-hmm. So then they just start carb loading and try to be eating full, yeah. But all they're doing is getting fat. They're not where if somebody's like, if he gets really, really flat, 40 grams of carbs can make a tremendous difference, and he's going to look like you put 2 inches on his arms. Yeah. So I would speak about that, because I've seen people say, "Man, I'm flat," and I'm like, "You're not fat. You're fat. You know, you're not even lean enough to be flat."
Well, that's what we see a lot of now is guys saying they'll put a picture up, but it's, "Oh, I'm flat." So yeah. Just it's like, well, no, you're not, and you know. So I think one of the things that have killed competitors is their ego, and they'll put it on a T-shirt, and all of a sudden their T-shirt's not quite as tight. So it's like, oh, I'm small, I got to start eating. Like they can't go through that. Sometimes you are just going to be a little bit flat, meaning you've burned out your glycogen. I mean, think about it. You're lower. You probably have cut your carbs 50% of what they were in the off season, and then even more beyond that.
Well, how much of a muscle is made up of water and glycogen?
A lot.
You know, the majority 50, 60% of the water,
at least, right?
So I mean, it can actually look like you're looking in the mirror, and so he gets up, he looks in the mirror, and it's like, I don't even look like I work out. You know, it's like, what the happened? And then one day, maybe not a refeed, or you know, there's a lot of ways that John will have that, you know, can work around that. 2 days later, it's like, whoa. And then
come to life.
Yeah, then he's on stage. It's a whole different person.
Yeah.
Only one day matters.
Yeah, and that's the way it's been with me. I mean, John has always got me ready early before a show. Weeks in advance, normally I'm as skinless or as shredded as anybody can possibly be. And for me, it makes a difference with the stress level as well. I feel confident. I don't feel like, oh, I'm not ready. I'm not ready. I start feeling ready, and then once I know I'm ready, weeks in advance, then we can start finding my best look. So then John will give me a plus 150 gram carb day, and it'll fill up and get my energy back again. I'll be able to train hard for a few days. So, I mean, you know, as any good coach, like John is my set eyes. John is the one that basically makes the adjustments for me, where I don't really have to think about it. I'm very knowledgeable. I've been competing over 12 years. I know what I see, but John is doing the thinking for me, which takes a lot of stress out of it. And then I know 100% that if I get a little bit fuller, sometimes even for that final little bit of fat loss process, sometimes it is take one step back to take 2 steps forward, and it always works. You know, you increase the carbs even for a short period of time. You increase your leptin levels, your thyroid function starts to go faster. So like Dave, we talked about earlier, you start getting leaner even faster towards the end. Like, you know, it takes 10 weeks to get to a certain point, and those last 2, 3, 4 weeks, all of a sudden your metabolism is revved up so fast that your body, as long as you don't it up and basically start throwing in cheat meals and crap because you think you're ready, you start getting leaner, and then you get to a point where you've acquired a leanness that you never thought you can actually make. And that's why people talk about me as skinless or the most conditioned on stage, because I'm willing to do what it takes to get that, because without that look, I won't get the placings that I've been getting. I'm not the biggest. I might not have the best symmetry. Well, I have pretty good symmetry, but as far as aesthetics, maybe it's not the best, but I come in conditioned. I come in very symmetrical, and we've maximized all my strengths and all my weaknesses to bring the best package possible. And since I've been with John since 2015, we've improved every year, and now people know who I am.
Well, I think just to kind of wrap it up, these are fun conversations to have because there's no set perfect answer for everybody. And it's the art of the sport, and this is what you gain with experience. And so these are the very fun conversations for me to have. I love talking about this stuff because, again, it just becomes what you're seeing, what you're observing, making decisions on the fly based on what you think is happening. And the more you do this, the better you get at it. So again, I wish we could sit here and give you an answer. If you're flat for 2 days, you add X amount of carbs, but it's just not that easy. And the same thing with your training. I wish I could say you need to remove X amount of sets, you need to do this, there's general guidelines that we've talked about, but it's really an art, and we just wanted to give you some things to think about today in your training, and particularly in your training, because again, Josh is a couple weeks out. So we make some modifications to the training. So that's it, guys. We appreciate you watching. And again, make sure you support Josh. He's 3 weeks out from the New York Pro. Make sure you guys check out EliteFTS.com. This is Dave's company. And Dave has been one of my mentors for many, many years. I appreciate all that he's done for me. So we will see you guys on the next video.
Yep. And I tell you what, if you have not checked out Elite FTS, their spider bar is by far the best squat bar I've ever used. I strained my bicep tendon back squatting 585, and then I immediately went and purchased this bar. It's a combination between a yoke cambered squat bar. It is phenomenal. A lot more stabilizer action. It has built my legs more than any back squat bar could ever have built. You got to get that Elite FTS spider bar.
If you like that video, I know you're going to love my app, available on the Google Play Store for Android, iPhones, and the Apple Store. There's so much information on here, it's amazing. Training, workouts, hundreds of workouts, nutrition methodology questions, chemical enhancement, supplementation, client prep, and a Q&A button. Check it out.